Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Alteryx for sponsoring today's event, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I'd also like to take the opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including Tableau, Microsoft, Exaptive, Pivotal, IBM, and Hortonworks, to name just a few. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had an opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Today's webinar is entitled, Get to Business Insights Quicker with In-Database Blending. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We'll have 3 panelists that I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be a 10 to 15 minute question and answer following the presentation. And this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. So I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Gene Rhinus, Dan Gananchel of Ultrix, and Ron Ortloff of Microsoft. Now, Gene Rhinus is a senior solutions engineer at Ultrix, where he's been helping customers solve their data problems and enhance productivity since 2011. Prior to joining Ultrix, Gene worked for a privately held business consulting firm, where he started using Ultrix when it was first introduced in 2006. And since then, Ultrix has been his go-to tool for solving complex geodemographic problems for corporate clients and Ultrix customers. Now, Dan Gananchel is an alliance manager at Ultrix. Dan focuses on partner marketing efforts with Microsoft and Qlik. He's held several roles in his career where he's produced strong record in driving customer partnership growth. Now, Ron Ortloff, he is Senior Program Manager at Microsoft in the Database Systems Program Management team, focused on elastic technologies such as Azure SQL Data Warehouse and APS. He has 19 years of experience building and deploying enterprise data warehouse solutions. So while at Microsoft, Ron spent the past 10 years implementing data warehousing BI solutions in finance, sales and marketing, and support. So recently on the Database Systems Program Management team, he's been helping customers deploy their solutions, leveraging Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So thanks for being with us today, Gene, Dan, Ron. We're looking forward to your presentation. Now, analysts in sales, marketing, finance, and operations have to prepare and analyze data quickly to answer important business questions. Time spent blending data takes away from time spent analyzing and acting on it. Analysts need an easier way to work with data in a database in order to quickly go from data blending to producing insights, in order to prepare data in 1/10 the time and automate the process for ongoing updates, utilize a drag and drop interface that doesn't require SQL coding to prepare, blend, and analyze data, and push the processing steps into the database rather than pulling the entire data set into the processing location. So Dan, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Thank you, Bill, for that introduction. We are very excited to be sponsoring today's webinar and presenting along with Microsoft. I know we have many people here today that are data professionals, so welcome. Your work with data is crucial to your organization's operations, and because of this fact, it is very important for you to identify ways in which you can optimize your work with data. So our goal in today's webinar is to show you how you can reduce the time and complexity you spend when working with data in a database or data warehouse. We want you to learn and see how you can spend less time getting your data prepared for analysis and visualization by reducing the amount of time it takes you to work with the data in a database. Specifically, we will explore how in-database blending helps you get to business insights quicker with more efficient and effective use of your data where it is stored. We will discuss how to, 1, take advantage of the processing power of the database to answer new business questions faster. 2, improve performance when working with large and complex data sets. And 3, leverage the database to scale out your data preparation and cleansing needs. That's giving you more power when putting together your data sets. Again, all while helping to reduce the time it takes to put those data sets together. So with that said, let's go ahead and begin. All right, so analysts, like yourself, depend on massive amounts of data to produce actionable insights so that your decision makers can quickly react to ever-shifting customer demands and business needs. However, to keep up with the pace of business, you rely on this data to drive deeper insights that help answer strategic questions. Now, data, whether that be customer, financial, or operational data, comes in many forms and from multiple sources. But that data can be messy, incomplete, and difficult to process. Oftentimes, the data requires significant manual preparation and blending before you can analyze the results and deliver answers to your organization in a timely manner. So it's no secret that analysts spend significant amounts of time, pretty much a lot of their time, blending and preparing data for analysis and reporting. In addition, you might have to enrich the data as well as perform advanced analytics like predictive or geospatial analysis to help generate deeper insights into what your data is telling you. Then you need to analyze, share, and visualize the data to help your decision makers understand the insights in order to better react to business needs and customer demands. Typically, this entire data preparation to insights process could take you up to several weeks to perform, especially if you are constantly pulling large and complex data sets out of the database to work on. And in today's fast-paced world, spending weeks to generate insights is not ideal. So, why does it take analysts up to several weeks to procure the right data in order to create an actionable data set? Well, to understand the challenges that analysts face on a daily basis, that you face on a daily basis, we conducted a few surveys and we found the following results. Number 1, organizations not having the proper data they need delays business insights, which in turn causes a negative business impact. Unfortunately, when working with extremely large data sets in a database, it is very, very common to experience delays in getting the proper data prepared, blended, and then analyzed due to processing limitations. For example, as you work with data in a database, it is best to limit movement of data to mitigate network bottlenecks and processing latency. After all, why would you move like a massive data set file from a database to your desktop when all you want are just a few pieces of data from it? However, many analysts find themselves moving data from the database to their desktop all too often each and every week, and this results in inefficient use of one's time and can delay you several weeks in getting to data-driven insights. Number 2, organizations want insight in hours or less. So reacting rapidly is very important as your decision makers strive to keep up with the pace of business. Hence, you need a better way to reduce the time spent in getting your data fit for analysis in order to speed up your time to insight. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this and probably face similar situations in your organizations. We have heard plenty of use cases where analysts are slowed down when trying to work with a database to get them the data they need. Fortunately, these two issues can be resolved by what we like to say employing in-database operations, specifically in-database blending, which enables you to be more effective and efficient in your work with data as it relates to data in the database. So taking advantage of in-database blending enables you to do the following. 1, you can utilize the in-database processing power to answer new business questions more quickly, speed up your time to insight. 2, you can avoid the need to write SQL code or other query languages, thus you can procure the dataset yourself, utilizing simple, intuitive drag-and-drop tools that make your work with data a lot more simple than trying to write a bunch of queries. 3, you can push the processing steps into the database rather than pulling the entire dataset out to the processing location. 4, you can employ the vast computing resources and processing power of the database to perform large and complex operations. And 5, this helps you perform sophisticated analysis on your data and repeat the process easily as any data changes. And these advantages lead to benefits, and what those benefits are, the benefits of utilizing in-database blending are, 1, you reduce the time spent in data preparation by eliminating the need to move data from one place to the other. 2, you eliminate delays caused by having to wait on others with the technical aptitude or the technical SQL coding skills or query writing skills needed to get you the data you need for analysis. This way you can easily perform the same processes with no coding required simply by using a few intuitive tools. And 3, you can leverage the database to scale out your performance and operational effectiveness when it comes to your work with large and complex data sets. So, now that we have a foundation for why in-database blending makes sense to utilize when working with data, large and complex data sets in a database, let's see how you can very easily and quickly perform this operation. Now, to illustrate this, we're going to use Ultrix as a tool to carry out the in-database operations, and we will use Microsoft Azure SQL Data Warehouse as our database example. But before we dive into how one would perform the in-database blending operation, let's first understand the database we are working in and why it makes sense to utilize the vast compute and processing powers of the database. With that, I'd like to introduce Ron from Microsoft to demonstrate to us the value and benefit of using Azure SQL Data Warehouse to scale out our data preparation powers. Ron?
Yes, thank you, Dan, and everybody. Pleasure to speak with you today. As Bill mentioned, I am a program manager here at Microsoft. I'm working on the Azure SQL Data Warehouse product currently. I'll be talking to you about that today. So, introducing Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Azure SQL Data Warehouse is a relational data warehouse as a service that's fully managed by Microsoft. Now, when we say data warehouse as a service, we're talking about what we call a PaaS offering, or platform as a service offering. So there's no need for you now with Azure SQL Data Warehouse to go out and procure a physical database or server for your data center. You go into our portal, as I'll show you a little bit later, and configure the service, and away you go. You can start using the service. It is the industry's first elastic cloud data warehouse, and it's built on top of SQL Server capabilities. It can scale from your smallest, talking gigabytes of data, up to even petabytes within your data warehouse. It's built on our massively parallel processing technology, which I'll go into here in a minute. It is instant on and scales in a matter of seconds, and it allows you to query both relational and non-relational data using our Polybase capability. It is powered by the Azure Cloud and the Azure Stack. It allows you to get started in a matter of minutes, and it's also integrated very nicely with our other Azure tools, such as machine learning or Azure Data Factory or Data Lake. We have a price performance configuration that is very competitive within the industry. Within your Azure bill, you're going to actually see two separate line items, one for the compute and one for the storage. You pay for what you want and when you need it by using the dynamic pause feature. So taking a look underneath the covers, just so folks understand why Azure SQL Data Warehouse can be so powerful for you and allow you to integrate so nicely with Ultrix. When you create your database within the Azure portal, underneath the covers for you, on your behalf, we create 60 separate databases for you. And that's shown here in the Azure Blobs section. So it's databases stored on remote storage and connected into a compute node. So with your 100 level setting, you see a single control node and a single compute node that's connected to all of these databases. Within a 600 level setting, then now you have 6 separate compute nodes, again still talking to the same control node, but now I've got 6 times more the amount of compute. Each of these compute nodes is then connected to its own separate set of databases and allows you to see up to a 6x scale factor just by setting that value within the portal. We will support up to a 6,000 setting, which would allow you to have 60 compute nodes, each connected to a single Azure Blob database. So from a distributed query perspective, what does this look like underneath the covers? So again, this is a separate diagram here. It shows you the control node or the head node with a set of compute resources underneath it, and then the storage on Azure Blob storage, as I mentioned before. A query comes in. If you're doing select star from fact XYZ, the control node has metadata stored in it. It understands where the compute nodes are located, what databases are attached to those. It will then send out the separate queries across the different compute resources. The results are then compiled back to the compute node and pushed to the control node and returned to the client controlling application. Within the databases themselves, you have to understand that data is actually sharded and separate over the logical data warehouse. Again, this is abstracted to the user, but this is how SQL Data Warehouse achieves the scalability within itself. So when you create a table, you specify a column that you actually want to distribute the data on. When you insert rows into that table, the data is then pushed into separate 60 databases underneath the covers for you. So here you can see value 1 goes to bucket 5, value 2 goes to bucket 31, value 3 goes to another bucket, value 1, same value, goes to the same distribution underneath the covers. With this example here, you can see a scenario where maybe I'm choosing to distribute on sex. So I've got male, female, and not applicable. What happens in this scenario is I actually have some database skew, and I don't have my data evenly laid out across the database system. In this case, anything larger than a 300 level setting, I'm not going to really see that much of gain in performance. I only have 3 databases underneath the covers that have data. Therefore, I'm not going to see anything beyond the 300 level of scale. What I can do in this scenario is I can actually flip to round robin distribution, and then I don't specify a hash value. What happens in that case then is data is evenly spread across all 60 databases. So this is a good default setting for folks to leverage, and it gets you a good spread of the data across the appliance. So taking a step back, within the all-up Azure ecosystem, where does SQL Server Data Warehouse fit? You can leverage it with Event Hub and Stream Analytics to load data into SQL Data Warehouse. You can connect it to a number of different sources, both structured and unstructured through Data Factory, and load data into SQL Data Warehouse. You can also leverage it as a target from loading data out of HDInsight through Data Lake or Blob Storage and pull it into SQL Data Warehouse there as well. Within the database, the data warehouse itself, you can use tools like Ultrix and blend in other data sources. create views that you want to see, distill data, refine it, enrich it, and then use it for tools like Power BI, Azure Machine Learning, or other visualization tools, and pull data out of it that way. So as a target, from sources on the left, data cooking, distilling, refining, Ultrix blending in the middle, and then pulling data out via Power BI, machine learning, or other UI visualization tools. Within Azure SQL Data Warehouse, we have a couple of different value propositions. So the first one is the ability to elastically scale the service. Because we have the storage remote from the compute, that gives us a lot of flexibility to change what levels of compute that we surface to the user. In this case here, maybe I have just a small daily load running. I can use the Data Warehouse Unit 300 level setting and have 3 compute nodes working over a set of data. If I have a large influx of data coming in, or if I have some large Ultrix workloads that I want to run, I can go into the portal, reconfigure the scale, and then present that database with more compute resources, run my large workload, and then scale it back down. So this gives you that ability to change the compute levels without having to procure more hardware, without having to reload your data in a very seamless and efficient manner. You also have the ability to pause the database compute altogether. So what this does is it leaves the data in place, doesn't touch it, and just leaves it at rest on the Azure Blob storage. All of your compute resources are taken away, and you're only paying at this moment for the storage. This comes in very handy in certain workloads where maybe if I'm doing some database blending during the day, during regular business hours, I can pause my instance at night, unpause it when I come back in the next morning. If I'm not going to use it over the weekend, again, same kind of deal. I can pause that on a Friday afternoon, unpause it on a Monday morning. From a compute and storage perspective, we are completely redundant from a server perspective within a data center. If you have a server that actually fails, we will bring another one online and resurface your database for you. The storage underneath as well is also geo-redundant. So if we were to lose a data center, that storage is mirrored to another location, and you'd be able to bring your database back online in that data center. So let's take a quick look at what the portal looks like and what it would be like to provision an Azure SQL Data Warehouse. So if you go into your favorite search engine, type in Azure Portal or Azure SQL Data Warehouse, you'll be brought into this Microsoft portal here. From there, I can click on New, and we have a series of offerings here within our marketplace. If I click on Data and Storage, that brings up these series of services. I can click on SQL Data Warehouse, and now I come into the provisioning page. So load up a database name here, subscription. I can specify a resource group if I want to logically put a set of servers together or a set of databases together. Can pick a blank database or a sample database. Here I configure a server, which is really just a logical server that you have where your data warehouse resides. And what picking a server allows you to do, server name, specify an admin login, password, and then also I can pick a location. And these are the data centers then that Azure SQL Data Warehouse is currently present in. So we have very good coverage worldwide. So all of those values are configured. And your database is provisioned. And then you'll see a blade come up that looks like this. So this is the Alteryx Blender data warehouse that we've created to run our demos today for you. What you see here then is some query monitoring as well as some resource utilization on the bottom. I have a set of server settings here that I can do in this blade, or I can come over to the menu over here. So this is the pause button, what I was referring to before. If I want to pause and take that data warehouse offline, all the compute resources go away, and I'm just, again, paying for the storage. If I want to scale up, I have that large workload coming in. I can come in here, adjust the slider bar to what resources I want to have. And we also have some connectivity here too. So if you want to open in Visual Studio, click here, and a blade will come out where you can launch Visual Studio. You can leverage Visual Studio Community Edition, which is free, to connect into your Azure SQL Data Warehouse. And then you can also directly here from the portal launch Power BI. So with both of these tools, the login credentials are passed in, the connection string is passed into that tool. You only have to type in the password and you're automatically connected into the system. For both scale and pause, we also have APIs, so you can add these into a scheduler or into some sort of automation if you want to automate the use of pause and scale. So with that overview of Azure SQL Data Warehouse, I will hand it off to Gene.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Let me share my screen here. And what you guys should be seeing, there we go, is the Ultrix Desktop Designer. The Ultrix Desktop Designer is a drag and drop analytical platform that requires no coding to be able to utilize things like the Azure Data Warehouse and other data that you have coming in, be able to publish out to Power BI, be able to use Azure ML text analytics, as well as many other things, including predictive, time series, all these different categories, spatial, all these different categories contain tools to be able to do the operations that you want to be able to do as you're going along. So today we're going to do some analyzing of some sales territories that happen to be loaded into my Azure Data Warehouse. So the first thing I want to do is be able to connect into my data. So with these in-database tools, all of the processing is going to happen inside of the data warehouse without having to move that data out to Alteryx to be able to work with it. So if I want to connect in database, I just bring in a drag and drop in a connect in database tool. This is where I could go out and configure this to be able to set it up to whatever type of database I have. In this case, we'll be using the Microsoft SQL Data Warehouse to connect to Azure. So we'll come down here, connect in, and I see the tables that are available to me inside of that data warehouse. So what I want to connect to first is my sales territory database. So we'll come down here, find sales and sales territory. So I connect to the database, and I just click OK in this case. I can then bring in a select tool and be able to see what fields I have available to me inside of that table. I can choose if I want to deselect some of them. So in this case, I won't keep the row GUID here or the modified date. We'll deselect those. And in order to do this, I want to be able to take a look at these sales year to date by territory. But my territories are all different. Each territory has a different number of customers. They're really not created equal. So if I want to do a fair analysis, I need to be able to pull in the number of customers that are within each territory. But unfortunately, that information isn't in my data warehouse right now. So I was able to reach out to one of my colleagues who was able to give me a Excel spreadsheet that contained that information. So I'm going to bring in an input data tool, in this case going right out to my desktop and be able to browse out and connect to some data. So here's my customers by territory file. If I go to open this up, we'll see the tables that are the tabs that are available to me. And unfortunately, each territory is in its own tab in this case. So I could bring in one tab at a time. I could bring in 10 different input tools, union them all together. In this case, I want to bring in all of them at the same time. So I'm just going to grab my list of sheet names with this input tool. Then I'm going to bring in another input tool called Dynamic Input. And as a template, I'm going to go out and connect to any one of those tables that happen to be, tabs that happen to be in that worksheet. This will just give me my schema. And then over here, I'm going to tell it that I want to dynamically update the sheet name from the sheet names that are coming in from the other tool. If I click on here and add a browse just to see what's going on, we'll just run this once. I can see there, you saw it counting up through. It brought in each one of those 10 tabs dynamically so that I didn't have to bring them in. So we're actually looking at 19,820 records here. But I don't want to work on this data on my desktop. I actually want to push it into Azure to be able to do the work. So let's go back to our in-database tools. We're going to take a data stream in tool, and we're going to go back out and we're going to connect to that same data warehouse. Now I have the option of creating a temporary table for that, or if I wanted it to be permanent, I could create a new table and that would be available to me. In this case, for the workflow, we'll just create a temporary table inside of the data warehouse to be able to work with. And then I want to do a little bit of summarization. So that data is coming in at the customer level. What I want to do is take that territory ID. I want to do a group by there. I want to do a count. In this case, that will give me my customer count. So we'll just rename that field customer count. Bring in a join in database tool. And we'll create our join. Now again, no SQL coding so far, but this is all being done inside of that SQL data warehouse. If I take my territory ID, it'll automatically find that I have the same name, a territory ID on the right side of the input. I have the option over here of choosing if I want that to be an inner join, an outer join, a full outer join. And here we'll just do the inner join for this particular one. Okay, so that's going to bring my data together for me, but I still want to do a little bit more calculation. So I'm going to bring in a formula tool here. And we're going to create a new field. We're going to call this sales per customer. We'll leave it as a double. That's a perfect field type. And then we'll choose the fields that we have. So we have our sales year to date, and then for each territory. Then we'll just put a little divide by sign in here, and we'll divide that by our customer count that we just calculated. So now we've built out the workflow to be able to do all of that in database processing. We haven't written a bit of SQL code so far. We want to push that data out to be able to work with it. In this case, we'll publish this out to Power BI. I'll bring in my Publish to Power BI tool. Oh, we need to add one more tool in there. We need to take a data stream out so that it comes out of the database and goes into our Azure data warehouse, or into our Power BI. We'll call the dataset demo. Table name we'll call territory. And we'll tell it to go ahead and replace it in case I have one out there already. And then over here, this is where I could either hard code in my credentials or I could have it taken, request my credentials when I go to run this. So we'll run this process. I'm going to do our data summarization. At this point, it's asking me to sign into my Power BI. And accept that it's okay. Go ahead and run this entire process, handle my publishing, and now that data would be available to me out on Power BI. Now there is one more thing that I want to be able to show you guys, and that's the ability to work with the Azure ML for doing some text analytics. So I'm going to connect one more time to my database. And this time we're going to bring in our production product review tab. So if we come down here, find our production product review, we can click on that. We'll bring this data stream into Ultrix. Actually, data stream out into Ultrix, I should say. from the database. And let's just take a quick look at what that data looks like. So we'll add a browse tool to be able to look at it. We want to click over here and tell it to not ask me every time for my my credentials when we run this. It may ask me one more time here, and then it'll stop asking. We're going to cache my token so that it doesn't ask me every time for that. That's going to go out. It's going to do the update. Still running that part of the process. At this point now, we can see that we have some text fields. If we look at this, we have some free-form text field that's inside of here. What we want to do is do some customer sentiment analysis on that. So I'm going to take this Azure ML database here, and let me open up one thing here really quickly. Just to grab my account key. So over here, I'm going to drop in my account key for this. I'm going to tell it to take that comments field and that I want to do sentiment analysis. So in this case, we'll push that data out to Azure ML. Only a few records that we're looking at here for example, but if we come over here, we can see that we've appended a new field on here. Losing my scroll bar on the bottom. So here's our comment score. So that's giving us our sentiment analysis score as we're going along over here. So that could then be pushed out to Power BI or wherever you needed to use it. So highly integrated into those tools. If we take a look at some of the other things that are available inside of Alteryx, we do have connectors to go out and connect to other things as well. If you have data that happens to be on an FTP site, you could bring in a download tool and be able to configure that to be able to pull records off or data off of FTP sites to be able to access any kind of a RESTful API or SOAP API where data may sit. We have tools to be able to do demographic analysis, geocoding, as well as geospatial work along the way, and a number of tools specifically for data preparation. So if you have data coming in that needs to be cleansed, this cleanse tool is very nice. You can choose the field that you want to bring in, and it will allow you to do standardization of all these different types of phone numbers out to a particularly standardized one. We can do date formatting, parsing along the way. If we need to take a look at parsing to be able to parse out IP addresses or phone numbers along the way, dates, addresses, etc. So there's a number of tools in here to be able to do all your data cleansing along the way as well. So with that demonstration, let me turn this back over to Dan. And
Thanks,
Dan, it's all you.
Thanks, appreciate it. So just to recap on what we've seen, so basically, again, we showed you the power, if you will, of Azure SQL Data Warehouse and how you can leverage that power to scale out your data preparation needs by using the power of the database. And then within that, how you can use Ultrix to go in there and actually perform those operations in the database itself without having to take the data out. And then from there, if you'd like, push directly to Power BI to do visualization or whatever tool if you happen to use some of the other visualization tools. Again, just to recap, in database blending, one, by utilizing it, it helps reduce the time spent in data blending because now you're not taking data out, having to put it to another location, process it there, and then put it back. So it helps you get to those insights quicker. Two, you eliminate delays caused by the need to rely on others with coding skills. Maybe you have an ad hoc project that you need to get done the next day, and you can't wait to send out the request and then wait to get data back. You just need to get it done quickly. This allows you in a self-service manner to perform that blending in the database you're trying to work with and get it done fast. And then three, as I mentioned, you can leverage the database for the vast computing and processing powers for scalability and performance. It's down below a couple of links in case you guys are interested in learning more. You can visit these links. And with that, I will pass it on to Bill for Q&A.
Hey, Dan, Gene, Ron, thanks very much for that excellent presentation. So we'll get started with today's Q&A session, and I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a great many questions that have come in during the presentation, and we'll do our best to get through them in the time remaining. So during the Q&A session, I'm going to leave up this slide, which has contact information for Gene, Dan, and Ron, in case you'd like to contact them following today's webinar. So let's get started. Let's start with this one. What is the time reduction, the speed benefit that analysts experience when utilizing in-database operations?
Okay, well, this is Gene from Ultrix. So a lot of that depends on the data that you're working with and how much data you have. If you're pulling data into Ultrix from a database or from a flat file or another source, you're limited to to the number of cores that are on the processor that's on your machine. You're not doing distributed computing, so. A lot of our customers that are working within database see orders of magnitude of performance increase because things like Azure DW, the Azure Data Warehouse, have the ability to be processing on 60 databases at the same time versus having to stream all that data through memory inside of Ultrix. So it's very difficult to put a number on it, but I would say it's in the order of magnitude to be able to do the processing inside of the database when you get to the point where you have a lot of data. I don't know if
yeah, I think just to elaborate on that a little bit too. This is Ron from Microsoft. Not having to pull data out of a database over the network and then land it on your desktop right there alone is going to give you some benefit. Pushing those statements down into the database actually itself, and then leveraging the scalability that we talked about there with the different data warehouse unit settings within Azure SQL Data Warehouse can give you additional scale by adding in more compute resources.
Gene, Ron, thanks for those great answers. Another question focusing on Alteryx. How do you perform cleaning and the complex transformations, for example, in the ETL process, to load data into the SQL Data Warehouse?
Well, so Alteryx has a number of tools. Like I did point out the data cleansing tool, but there's also a number of parsing tools that are available as well. So if you do have data that needs to be broken into columns, or you need to parse some complex data like XML or do some regular expressions, it's all a matter of choosing some of the 200 tools that are available inside of Alteryx that can be configured as part of that workflow without having to write any code to be able to get the data cleaned and in the right shape that you need to be able to push it back into the database.
Okay, and then a little more clarity on in-database processing. The question is, when you load the data, is Alteryx pushing a process to Azure SQL Data Warehouse? Where is the processing happening to load the data, especially when it might be in the gigabyte range on a daily basis?
I don't know, Ron, do you want to talk a little bit about the load process in Azure?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of tools that you can leverage for loading data into Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Common tools such as SSIS can be leveraged, to extract data out of a flat file, out of another relational source or an unstructured source, and then pump that data into SQL Data Warehouse.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. About Alteryx Designer. Can Alteryx Designer connect to other types of databases, for example, Google BigQuery?
Oh, yes, this is Gene. Absolutely. So although, we showed connecting to an Excel file in this case, but Alteryx can connect to any kind of a database, whether it be or any type of an API cloud source. So Google BigQuery is one of them. We can do a direct connection from Ultrix to there. We can connect to, Teradata, Oracle, other databases as well, SQL Server if it's running, locally within your environment, as well as any type of a flat file, XML file, JSON data, any source that data can be in. It can be leveraged inside of Alteryx and then pushed into the database of your choice for the in-database processing as well. So.
Okay, and just as a point of clarification, are there RAM limitations when doing out-of-database work? So
as far as RAM limitations, Ultrix will take advantage of as much data or as much RAM and hardware as you have. So if you have multiple processors, it's a multi-threaded application. It will work in RAM, but if you don't have enough RAM to be able to do the in-memory processing, we spin up temporary files to be able to override that in a highly indexed columnar format to keep the speed up. So there's really no limitation to the amount of data that you can process with Ultrix. Your performance will vary depending on the hardware that you have, and again, that's one of the advantages of working inside of the database is that quite often there's quite a bit more processing resources available in the database than there would be on a single server or single desktop that would be running Ultrix.
Okay, great, thank you. So do I specifically need Alteryx to perform in-database blending on Azure SQL Data Warehouse?
That's a question for Ron.
So without a tool like Ultrix, you're going to be more into writing things through standard SQL and not really leveraging a lot of the benefits that are there in the UI. So it's a matter of preference. It's a matter of skill set. But you can certainly do standard ETL, stored procedure transformations on Azure SQL Data Warehouse itself.
Okay, thank you, Ron. And a little bit further to that same topic, does Alteryx perform in-database blending for other databases besides Azure SQL Data Warehouse? And if so, where can we see a list of those?
So you can find a list of those at Ultrix.com. I will, as of version 10.0, which came out on the 5th of May, right now we support in-database on Amazon Redshift, Hadoop through Hive, Impala, or Spark, Microsoft SQL Data Warehouse, which you just saw, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, and Teradata is the current list of what I would call translators that we've built to be able to take the workflow that you've designed and translated into the appropriate SQL MapReduce, whatever the appropriate code is for the database that's doing the processing.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Now, obviously, Alteryx has this really nice drag and drop user interface. To what extent does a new business analyst need to understand SQL and all the SQL lingo in order to be able to use Alteryx, or does your UI take the place of that?
So in a lot of cases, the UI takes the place of that. I'm just going to quote one of my my Alteryx users from a company up in Canada, and we're sitting in a meeting one day, and she said, somebody can use Alteryx even if they think SQL is the second part of a movie. I thought that was a little bit funny. So really, if you understand your data and you understand what you want to do with it, our join tools are as easy or easier than doing a VLOOKUP in Excel. Really, most of the users using Alteryx don't come from a coding background; they come from an Excel background.
Good, excellent point. So, we saw a lot about Azure and its cloud offering for SQL Data Warehouse, but can Alteryx also perform in-database operations for on-premise database? And if so, how would the two get connected together?
So yeah, so we just it's kind of very parallel to the other question that came up earlier about the different databases we can connect to. So if you have an on-premise data warehouse like a SQL Server or Oracle or Teradata that happens to be internally, you're using your either the native connectors that Ultrix provides or the ODBC or OLADB drivers that are installed on your machine, configured by your IT department to be able to connect to those.
Okay, all right. And besides in-database blending, what other capabilities does Alteryx have, and can I perform those in database as well?
So the in-database functionality is really limited to the normal data blending, the ability to join data, to filter data, to summarize, do some sorting, some formulas to be able to calculate. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg for Ultrix, as we do have inside of Ultrix is a complete end-to-end analytical platform. So there are capabilities that can't be done right now in database for things like geospatial. If I want to find the distance between 2 points, be that in a straight line or over the TomTom road network, to be able to find the nearest store to every one of my customers, to be able to take my customers and put them in the appropriate county to be able to calculate taxing, sales tax, and things like that, can all be done through the geospatial tools in memory. And then we have a whole suite of predictive tools that rely on the R language, or the R application, to be able to do the calculation, but we put a wrapper around that so that it's very easy to take and do some different types of predictive and time series calculations, ARIMA or ETS for time series, neural networks, and different types of regression analysis inside of Ultrix. Grouping tools like being able to do k-means clustering and principal components. That's all built in, and we've put that same kind of easy user interface around those capabilities that we've put around the SQL, the no SQL required type of configuration for our tools as well. So there's over 200 tools in Alteryx that can do different things, and there's probably only, let me do a quick count here. It looks like there's about 15 or 16 different tools that function in the database.
Yeah, I've always been particularly impressed with the geospatial capabilities in Ultrix. That's really quite a bit of magic that you do there. If one is an expert user in SQL and that sort of thing, is it possible to see the code that's being produced by the drag and drop UI if I wanted to check it?
Oh, absolutely. So there is what's called a dynamic output for the in-database tools. That dynamic output tool, when I connect it to the workflow, can tell me what the query is. It can give me metadata about the connection name, the input connection string that's being used. It can record info out to XML for being able to record metadata. So, and one of those pieces is the actual query that's being generated. It can be output as well. So, we don't bury anything from the user. We just give them a layer to kind of, I wouldn't say protect them, but to keep them from having to write code. Because even people that I know that are excellent at writing code find that once they start to trust the Ultrix tools, that they're able to do things in one fifth of the time that they used to spend doing them. More time for analysis, less time accessing data, getting it into the right shape, and writing code.
Yeah, I know that's a feature of which I'm a big
fan. I'll add in there too. This is Ron, by the way. When I was demoing the Azure portal before, and you can see the query activity from there. You can also see the statements that are being sent into the database. There's also what we call dynamic management views. If you wanted to actually write SQL and be able to view what queries have been running and how long they've been running. So those are also options as well.
Oh, yeah, great. Ron, that's good.
Hey, Well, Gene, Dan, Ron, we've had a lot of questions come in from the audience. Got a minute here. Would anyone like to offer a little summary of what we've seen here?
No, Dan?
Yeah, I'll go back to this slide. If you're interested in learning more about Azure SQL Data Warehouse or Alteryx, I would just point the audience to the two links at the bottom of this slide. You can find out more information from both.
Hey, Gene, Dan, Ron, thanks for those great answers to some very good questions. And for those of you who asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all the unanswered questions to Gene, Dan, and Ron and the Alteryx team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. So I have just a few quick announcements. First of all, if you'd please mark your calendars for May 17th, that's our next Data Science Central webinar, which will be 5 key self-service analytics and how to get the data, also sponsored by Ultrix. Now, today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the homepage of datasciencecentral.com in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close, and I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to Alteryx for their sponsorship, and our speakers today, Gene Rhinus, Dan Gananchel, and Ron Ortloff, for their insights into today's topic. Now, my name is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event, and I look forward to seeing you all again on May 17th. Have a great day.